there, and welcome back to part two of this two-part video for Boynton Beach Inlet. We're painting the pump house there and the cranes at sunrise. Yesterday we got through the first overall wash. Consider it the background. It was the blue sky, the light orange, and what was a gray color, a light gray color in the where the water is going to be. At the end, I had put in the water in the background as a second layer after the first layer dried, and a coat on the pump house building, and started to flesh out the jetty. We're going to continue on. As we get to these middle stages, the trick is to find areas that are darker than what you've put down and are discrete. In other words, aren't touching, so we can build out the shapes and build them layer upon layer. We've got a really good foundation at this point. At the very end yesterday, we put a little bit more orange down and really warmed up that bottom part. So I think first I'm going to do is come in with more tone in the pump house and the roof of the pump house, and then off to the side, that mound with the pile of, well, I don't know if it's a built-up pile or the mound there with grasses on it. I don't know if they pushed sand there when they were pumping out originally, and it grew grass on it, or if it's always been that way. But it's behind the jetty. So we can work on those two things and dry them, and then from there we'll be able to pick what's next, which will probably be to start to focus on the clouds and then on the jetty itself, and I'll leave the water as probably the last thing I work on. So here we go. And with that, let's get rid of that. There we go. Okay. I'm still learning this software, but it's getting better. By the way, for those of you who are interested, what I'm using for this multi-camera setup is Switcher Studio. It's not cheap, but it does two things that I need. One is that it uses iOS or Apple iPhone and iPad cameras as the source cameras, so I didn't have to go out and buy extra cameras. I had a couple of phones lying around, so that helped. And it also allows me to do cuts on the fly, add text if I want to, all that stuff. It works really, really well. I haven't used it in a while, so I'm getting used to it again, but that's Switcher Studio. Price is okay. I mean, it could be cheaper, but if I'm going to do this more and more, I think it's the right thing to get. First thing I'm doing is refreshing my colors from yesterday. And again, those were French Ultramarine for my blue, and Transparent Pyrrole Orange, the core QOR version of this color. But I find it runs a little bit redder than I like for this sort of painting. So I grab a warm yellow, almost an orange. It can be a cadmium yellow medium, something like that. And add that. It gives it a little bit of body to the color. So I'm just mixing up my colors here a little bit, getting them ready for go time. So basically I've got my blue, my orange, and of course the gray that I made up of the two colors, which is in a separate well, which helps me to keep things moving a little bit. As always, I am using two different water jugs or buckets, one for clean water to take the fresh water to my wells when I'm mixing paint and adding water to my paint, and one for cleaning off the brush. Invariably, I always end up going into the clean with the dirty. It just happens, but I try to last as long as I can. All right, so I know that the roof is actually oranger, but I'm going to give it a coat of this gray first, and then after I dry it, I'll deal with getting that tone moved over. I'm using a fairly small brush at this point. This is a 10 round. I don't know if that's small to you, but it's small to me. I work with as large a brush as I can get away with. It helps me keep my paintings on the looser side, even these architectural ones. Now coming in with this gray, it's covering, so even that orange that got in to the shape of the building is not a problem. It's just giving it a little glow of the orange, like it's kicking back in, but it's not dominant. So it's working out just fine. All right. While this is still wet, I'm going to pick up a little bit of blue and drop it in to let that color vary a little bit. I always have my kitchen roll or paper towel nearby so that I can take some paint out of my brush. At this point, it's all about having the right amount of pigment on your brush. Too wet and it gets everywhere. Too thick and it's not transparent anymore. So it's all about, I like these Rosemary brushes, Rosemary Company. I think they're the Snowdrop watercolor brushes. They are not expensive. They're actually, for the quality of the brushes, they're quite good. They're synthetic, and I use the rounds, and even after a few years they come back to a great point. So even a size 10 is not a problem for me to paint with. I'm not going to mess with those cranes just yet because I'm going to do some more work on the sky, and they're just going to get silhouetted down there anyway, so there's no point in working on them just now. Alright, so we have the shape of the pump house in, and now we've got that dark hill, and that dark hill runs behind the railing of the jetty. I'm going to come in and do that in dark. And looking at the photo, that actually comes in even farther than I've drawn it, so I'll probably bring it almost to the building. What we'll do to show the railing of the jetty is I'll come in with some white or a light toned watercolor pencil on top of that greeny gray color to identify the railings on this side. On the other side, they're dark because they're silhouetted against the water. So it's so far it's working out as far as what we're trying to achieve, which is to build this painting. Layer on layer is the one thing we're doing, because that's how I work in watercolor. I try to work from lightest to darkest, big shapes to small shapes. And anybody who's been in my classes for a while knows that. And I like to work transparently, so I build up my layers, incorporating the colors. That are in the underpainting. and letting them shine through. That gives the whole painting a unity color-wise that you can't get if you're gonna just drop colors on top of each other and not think about them. I might take a couple of passes at this. I don't know, it's not a mountain, we're gonna call it a little hill, the mound, whatever we're gonna call it. And also that gray, because it's on top of that orange, it's got an almost green cast to it, which it's more dark than anything about a color. But it is nice that it's leaning in the right direction. I'm doing one continuous wash here. And this may need a second coat because this is definitely, right now my color is very close to the value of the jetty at the top and the water above it, and that's just not true. In the photo, it's definitely much darker, even darker than the pump house, and that's what I'll have to remember. There's a lot of differences between watercolor and oil painting, and you guys seem to run into that all the time, my friends who started in oils and have moved over to watercolors. But one thing that they both have in common is the idea that value is a great saying, and I don't know where it came from, but I do love it. I first heard it from in a workshop I was taking, and it's color may be king, but value does the heavy lifting, and it's so true. What is important is getting your values right, and get your values right and get them. So in oil painting and watercolor, you're constantly comparing the shapes that you've defined one to the other. This is this lighter? Is it darker compared to that? And you're doing that with everything. All of the things that if you focus on one thing without it being relative to everything that you're painting, you run into the problem of getting your values out of whack. And the minute your values get out of whack, you lose the narrative, you lose the thread. Value is incredibly important. Notice also that because the background painting from yesterday is good and dry, I brought this line right up to the top of the jetty, and because that paper is not wet or damp, it's not running into it, even at this angle. That's a huge, I can't stress enough how important letting your paper dry, whether you use a hairdryer or another way to do it, between your layers. Otherwise you're fighting mud, you're fighting stuff not having clean edges. If you need to have a soft edge, and there are plenty of times when you do, then you do work with a damp surface or a wet surface, and you let them come together. I tend to do that more, sorry, those are my brushes. I tend to do that more early in the painting, looser and looser and wetter, and I get more controlled and smaller shapes as I get into the painting. Okay, so I am going to cut here because I'm going to dry this, and when this is dry I'm going to come back in and focus on the clouds as well as the top part of the pump house, the roof of the pump house. After that we'll start to build the jetty. So we're coming along already. I can see the painting. It's working out much better than it did in my live class, and that has a lot to do with I had a plan when I came into this, and I knew what I wanted to do. You can be a very loose painter and you can be very free if that's your style, but you still need to have a plan, or at least I do. I can't rescue a painting when I get completely off the rails. The best thing I can do is know what I want to do from place to place and then work from that plan. So you can probably tell that at one point in my life I was a project manager because I do like to work from a checklist. Um, Everybody's different. This is how I do it, and it's worked for me over the years that I've been painting. It's also what I was taught to do early on that I had trouble understanding. It took me a long time to get to the place where what I was being taught when I was first learning is really, really useful. So with that, I'm going to cut, and we'll come back when this is dry. Okay, we're back. Between sessions, I actually went into the hill area with a second glaze. I did a little value check, and I know that except for maybe the roof, this mound and the shadow under the jetty are the darkest bits. So I went back and deepened that with just another pass. I didn't think it was worth showing it to you, so I just did it, and then I turned on the camera. So that is where we are. I can come in, take some of my orange with a little bit of blue in it. I'm trying to make a deep brown without it getting too gray, so it's more orange than blue. That's the nice thing about working with these two colors. They play well together. You just have to kind of keep trying till you find what you want. Knowing that I've got that gray underneath there, I'm leaning towards the orange in this color. And I'm going to put in the darker bit in the roof line of the pump house. Things are progressing pretty quickly now. Down here underneath the orange there's a darker color, so I'm going to lay that in. And I can block in dark shapes for the two windows and the garage door that's over here. All right, so that was a little bit of work, but I think that I want to dry again because I want to get into this sky. I think I want to get that developed before I go too much further. And then I probably can work on a little bit of the building, and then we'll move on from there. So I'm going to stop right here, and then we will continue. Okay, we're back. That didn't take too long. It's so much easier to do these layers when you're using a hairdryer. It's incredibly important to have, I'm just going to adjust this a little bit, make my horizon straight. Okay. It's incredibly important to have patience and either let it dry naturally or come in and use a craft dryer or a hair dryer between layers. When you want the effect of bleeding into a different layer, then you continue working in it when it's wet and when it's damp. But when you're building layers of distance especially and value layers, it's easier to work in this kind of color forms kind of way, where you're placing the pieces and the accessories right on top of the background. So let's get in there and do a little bit of the sky. And after the sky, while it's still wet, I might put the darker shadow on the underside of the jetty in. I think that's our plan. All right. You don't need to see me anymore. Let's get rid of me. Okay. Looking at the values on the mound, the water, the building, I can certainly darken the sky a little bit, and I will. The building probably needs another hit of darkness, and maybe I'll do that when I'm doing the jetty. I think the water is probably where I want to be, and that's probably where I'm going to key everything else to. We'll go from there. I'm going to save the water for last, and I'm going to save the cranes for last because they're small details and they're dark, and then probably the rails of the jetty on this side, which will be done in a light colored pencil. So bear with me one moment. I have to get my tape. I'm going to tape off I'm back. I'm going to tape off that water line right at the sky. Hopefully this time it doesn't bleed like it did last time. Get that in there. I do enjoy working on blocks of paper like this that are glued on all four sides. They do make it so that it doesn't buckle nearly as much. All right, how am I going to do this sky? I'm going to get some more orange going on my palette. And I've got some of that gray mixed up that's got some of the orange and some of the blue, and they're kind of like next to each other, so I can play around with them as I need. Alright, and I'm also going to charge up my blue. Not that I need direct blue at this point, I don't think. It's mostly the orange and the muddy kind of gray. Also going to move my brushes a little bit so they're out of my way. I'm going to switch to a number 14 brush for this, I think. Come right in here and add a little bit more orange. Bring it right to the edge. Right to the edge of that hill. Try to be careful to vary two things. Vary the height of this so it's not all one height with the orange. I'm going right through those cranes, that's fine. The building is dry, so I go right up next to it and it won't bleed in, or at least it shouldn't. You can also vary some edges. So some of them have very hard edges. Some of them I'll take a damp brush and just come in and just work them a little bit so that they're not quite so hard. You don't have to do it everywhere. In fact, I wouldn't do it everywhere. That goes behind the roof, okay? Now, speaking of working in damp, here's where we can throw in some gray. Even some blue right into the orange while it's still wet and damp to make those lower level clouds. Because that orange is wet, it's going to bleed up into it and make that shape for us without us having to do too much. And I'm just going to take the runoff off of there so that it doesn't leave through the tape, hopefully. On the other side, I'm going to take this right to the building right here at the edge and shoot it out the other side so it's kind of connected. Even though it might not do that exactly in the photo. And if this edge is a little bit too hard with the clouds, just come in damp brush and just break some of it. Don't have to do it everywhere. That's looking good. There is some more of the darker orange over here. While it's wet, you can get some more strength into it in spots. And I put it straight across the page. Now that also, I'm going to flip this for a second because on this side it's very gradual and fades up. So I'm going to come in with a wet brush, start to fade that up a little bit. Now is when you want to have that clean water versus dirty water. Okay, good. So that wasn't too hard, and if you do get a bit of an edge, you can always come in with some paper towel and just blot a little bit. While this is wet, I'm coming in with an even stronger orange over here. I'm filling in a little bit right here. That. And remember, we lost that gray that I put in, so I'm going to just pop it right into this orange. Just like that. You get up to the side of the building, but not into the side of the building, or you'll get an edge on it. There we go. Okay, good. Now we've got to tackle some of the clouds that are here. And this is a gray that's more of the blue, almost all blue. It's a pure gray. And these clouds are kind of sitting in front of that stuff and above. The key is to allow yourself to make a believable cloud shape. Look at your photo. Try not to make what you think a cloud looks like. Try instead to make what it looks like here, although there's plenty of room for variety. Taps right down into that orange bit. Another one of these over here. It's a good idea when you're working on these clouds to hold your brush at the back of the brush and make indistinct shapes. Don't try to draw with your brush too much. Always freshen up your color a little bit and tap it in towards the bottom. Clouds are almost always darker a little bit at the bottom. So either let a bead form, which is a great way to do this, or just come in and drop a little bit. wet your brush, take most of the moisture out on your kitchen towel, and just soften up a couple edges too. Clouds are also almost always lighter towards the top, so you can remove some of the pigment. While it's damp, it's easier to do. So get your brush wet, take most of the water out on your paper towel, and then come in and kind of steal some of that paint off of there. Now also when I can make that adjustment to up here where I had the run back and kind of hide my run back. I wouldn't normally want the cloud to be exactly in the corner of the painting, but I'm using it to strategic effect here. A little bit more here. And if you look at the architecture of the clouds, this is how it works. These clouds are sitting in front of the background of the color. Working from the back of the brush, it's easier to make a calligraphic mark, and you can always come in and clean these up a little bit if they get too random. There. That's not so bad. Soften up the tops a little bit. I want to reestablish that down there. I don't want it to be as dark as that pile of that hill, whatever we're calling it. I probably will now have to darken the hill a little bit. That's all right. Gives me a chance to also come over and reestablish this so that it's connected on both sides. Just feels more realistic that way, rather than stopping at the pump house and then continuing on. And in the photo, there's just these little distant bits that I think sell it, so that we don't have to do too much over here. Okay, I'm gonna just take some of this color right out of here so it matches the other side. So I'm gonna wake it up with a damp brush. I'm going to do a little blot in that orange bit that I have right next to the house. Now we've got the glow on both sides. Let's soften this up too a little bit. Just a tiny blot. Boom. Okay. Now for the reveal. Did it work? Well, again, I ran in a little bit. Not my favorite thing when that happens, but I'd rather know now and clean it up. So I can come in with a damp brush and go back and forth. And blot at the horizon. See, it doesn't just happen to you guys, it happens to me too. But since it's still wet, I can take a moment to clean it up before I dry the paper, and then I would have trouble. There. That's all right. A little bit on the other side, just get this little dark bit at the horizon. Back and forth with a damp brush, and we blot. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna call the sky done. It's not exact, but it's, this is a loose impressionistic painting, so we're happy enough with it. I have to watch this. It might come down a couple of times. We'll see. I may have to darken the ground, the hill, and the pump house, and that would give me a chance to glaze in a little bit more blue and clean that up anyway. So before we run to the dryer, I am going to mix up the dark. It's mostly on the blue side. I'm continuing to keep this mixed with just the orange that we made out of the orange with a little bit of yellow in it. That's our color. And then the blue, which is the ultramarine. I'm going to add just a little bit of ultramarine. Doesn't take a lot to shift it to the gray. Into the blue. The pyrrole orange is a very strong color. And while we're here, I can come in and build in that dark shadow that's under the jetty. And it starts thicker on the left-hand side and gets thinner. It juts out a little bit right here and then continues on again this way. Maybe I made my angle too flat, but that's all right. Here, got some more dark in here. It's drying already, so I'm gonna have to just basically repeat the stroke. Terrific. The bottom edge of it can be pretty jagged. That's okay. The water is actually flat against it, but it changes a lot. But make that fairly straight or clean as far as the line goes. I'm going to add a little bit more dark back here. And give it the feel of that jut out and that change of angle without trying to spend too much time on it. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. We're going to dry this. I am going to come back and do some adjustments and some more work on the jetty, and then we're going to hit the water. Okay, we're back. It is looking good. What do I want to work on? The building isn't flat, it's like hexagonal, so I need to show that by darkening. If I squint at the photo, it's the middle panel of the building. So it's going to be I have to be careful because of where I place those windows that I don't put them in the middle of the panel. Color-wise, this is mostly blue, and I'm strengthening that shadow line that's underneath the roof. And if that runs down into that shape, that's okay. Go almost all the way right to that window, and almost all the way right to that other window to give us the plane of the building. I think that works pretty well. While I'm here, I'm going to darken up the inside of the doorway. Okay. Taking a little paint out of my brush on the paper towel and just cleaning up that edge. Okay. Now let's talk about value for a second. This water can be a little bit darker, then the jetty is going to have to go darker. So those are our two moves. I'm going to, and because we have the railing here, I don't care if I connect the two at that point. I can even bring, if I have to, bring the dark of the landmass over. Maybe I might even throw some people in there. So I'm going to get, I think I'm going to use a light but almost pure blue on top of what's already down there for the water, which was kind of a warmy kind of a gray as the orange from the sky got into it. I think this is the right move. I may end up having to darken the pump house entirely and the landmass, and that's fine. That's what we do. This painting, that's what painting is all about for me. It's about getting the values right and comparing as you go along. You make those big shapes early on, and then it's not really correcting so much as I think adjusting is a better word. Okay. I like that already. While we're at it, I'll go back to the 14 brush and get some gray and some blue juiced up because this is too light. I'm gonna come in and darken this, but it's still light enough. And the easiest way to not get a line between the shadow at the bottom and the whole thing is to just glaze the whole shape rather than trying to go up to the line of that shadow and then you go to like a border line. Just glaze the whole thing in. Same thing at the top. You don't want to have a glowing white spot anywhere. Now, in the photo, this is darker than the water. So I'm going to try and get that a little bit darker. Mix up some stronger paint. Bring it up into the gray. Add a little bit of orange into my blue. And yeah, that's what we're talking about. Once we get those railings on top of the jetty, that'll be fine. So I don't have a whole lot of detail in my jetty, but again, it's almost all in silhouette, so it really doesn't matter. So then the thing to think about is, I've got this warmer glow happening here because it's against the orange there. I'm adding a little bit more orange into my gray here in the jetty so it shifts a little bit. Now we're cooking. Really throw in some deeper tone here. Under the building and here where it meets the water, because I think that'll help sell the water as the right value. Okay. Warm this up again as we darken. Warm it up here too. Give it some variety. Variety never hurt anything. It's always more interesting. Again, I'm going right to that shadow line and covering it. That way there's no indistinct, weird line at the bottom of it. Doing this means I have to strengthen here again, so I'm just dropping in some color. All right, I'm gonna add a little bit of stuff out here just to make it interesting. It's not really there, but it's making up for the fact that there's a change in the jetty in the photograph that I'm kind of ignoring. Because honestly, you only have to make things as complex as they need to be to tell the story. You don't have to. You can simplify a lot, and I'm a big fan of simplifying. While I'm at it, no, I'm going to let that dry. I'm going to darken the whole pump house so it pushes out against the water. I need to let this sit for a while, let that bead really set in and dry, and when I come back, I'm going to do the building. The base of the building, one wash over all three panels, all the three faces of it. Darken the mound of the earth. I need to make this darker now to stand out. We'll make a head fake towards the railings at some point with a really fine brush, and then it's the water. So we're almost done. We're getting quite far along. So hang with me. Through the magic of editing, I'll be right back to you, and it'll probably be a half hour for me. Okay, I don't want to play too much. So, see you in a minute. Okay, I'm back. In this stage, we are going to darken the, you can't see it there, you can't see my finger, the pump house. And the little mound here, that should get our values just about where I want them. Then we're going to put our water in. The last thing we'll do is the fence on the jetty and the cranes. Let's talk about the water for a second. The water is going to go in 2 wet washes, or I'm sorry, a wet wash and a dry wash. If we think about how we did this first, we've got a warm, light color that's all that reflected stuff underneath. Now we've got these bigger shadow shapes. The shadow of the pump house, the shadow of the jetty, and the shadow of the jetty over here. We're going to get that in another wet wash. Okay, you don't need to see me anymore. There we go. We're going to do another dark wet wash that's got soft edges, and then when that's dry, we'll come in with the vertical darker bits to make up the waves. That'll take care of that. So we're doing this first, then we'll come in and do the water. The last will be the railings and the cranes. Okay, so we're in the home stretch, folks. To make that dark edge underneath the roof line. In fact, I should do it up here too. Just a little bit. Grab a little bit more fresh paint on my palette. Still working with those same 2 colors. The whole painting is these 2 colors. Adjusting that little wing that comes out there. Go right over the windows, go right over that other plane. If we lose the difference between the 2 planes or the 3 planes, I can always come back in and darken that one piece. Bring it right down to the top of the walkway on the jetty. Correct this just a little bit, bring out the edge of the building so it matches. That's better, I think. darken the roofs as well to keep them in the right proportion of value. That is good. I'm fine with that. I'm gonna let that sit. Let's grabbing some more of the orange. That orange, remember that orange is not the pure pyrrole orange. I've been adding that warmer yellow to it as the base of the orange color. And that's important in this little bit here because when you add the blue that's kind of red to the orange that's got some of that yellow in there, and the gray, if you're orange heavy, the gray somewhere at some point almost looks a little browny green. We need to darken this up. We're doing that to push the water back and the jetty forward. Put in the dark between those two lighter tones will achieve the depth we are looking for. And same as when we're doing the jetty, we varied the color. Get some of that blue into this darker color. Don't let it all be one color. Anytime you're filling in and making a wash of a shape, I know the first thing I ever taught you guys was the flat wash in one color. But after you get control of your brushes and your paint, throw that out the window and always look for a way to adjust the color as you're doing it. Adding a little bit of a warm or a cool. Shifts between warm and cool within a wash really start to make it interesting and can give it even more dimension. And I'm really pushing the darkness on this mound because it really is one of the darkest features in the painting, and it has a job to do value-wise. Still holding my brush pretty far back. I don't like to work with it where I'm painting like it's a pencil. Sometimes it creeps up on me and I have to check myself. Break the planes of these shapes a little bit, add a little bit of a, might be a grass coming up or just a little doodad of a shape. Make sure it's a little bit darker down at the bottom. But see, by darkening this shape as it extends on top of the jetty and is the barrier between the jetty and the water behind the pump house, all of our values now come into alignment. Everything is working the way we want it. This is exactly where I want this to be. Okay. There's no reason why I can't put the cranes in now because they're on dry paper and everything around the cranes is dry. So I just need to grab a small brush. I'm going to grab a rigger that can come to a nice point and an even smaller brush and get in there and just knock these out with a dark color. Now these smaller round brushes, they don't hold as much paint, so you have to keep on top of that. And I've got my pencil drawing here, so I can just come in. And I'm not going to draw or paint in the wires coming from those. I think they'd be too thick. So they just kind of disappear on us. They do need to be dark. Fairly thick on the paint, and they're silhouetted shapes. Almost looks like a giraffe. That's all right. Gives you something to look at. This one's got a straight line at the top. A couple little lines coming off the bottom of it. You don't have to paint every last piece of it. You want to give it some character to the shape, even if you have to enhance it a little bit. By leaving that water on the darker side, we've given ourselves some room for how dark this needs to be so that it pushes against the sky. There we go. In this case, I am going to put just a little bit of the I guess I have to put it here too, or it doesn't make sense. Just keep that line super thin, just touching. Okay, that looks great. And I'm just going to extend this to the ground plane so we don't have to deal with it in any other way. Good. All right. I am going to dry this off, and we are going to come in. I'm going to do one more thing. Before we start the water, I'm going to come in and darken. Now that that building is darker, if I darken the orange of the sky just a little bit more, keep it transparent, but darken it up a little bit more, it's going to push that water flow forward. And we're doing a lot with our layers to give us that sense of depth. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm drying it. I'm going to come in. I'm going to add the orange. And that's something I'm always thinking about when I'm painting is, are my values correct? Do I have to adjust anything? How does this compare to that? You know, this value is in the photo fairly close to the sky, at least on this side, but there's a definite separation in the photo that I think I can get if I just saturate this orange a little bit. So I'm going to do that. I'm not going to bother with taping it this time. I'm simply going to turn it upside down. And but I gotta get it good and dry so those cranes don't run. So I'll be back in a couple minutes. Okay, we're back. The cranes are dry. The ground plane is dry. All our values feel right, which really helps sell it, especially when you're working with such a limited palette of colors. All right, I am going to take a piece of paper towel. My orange well got a little dirty, so I'm going to just clean that out real quick and start with some fresh color in here. No point in going muddy this point in the process. All right, so that's some pyrrole orange, and I'm grabbing some of that warm yellow, which is like a cadmium yellow medium. I think it has a different name on my palette, but that's what it is. And I'm just going to be careful with the shoreline and the side of the building. I can paint right over my cranes, and I can already tell that this was the right decision. I'm going to go across pretty quick because I can add a swipe of that blue or gray right here while it's drying. So we've still got that going on. Now come in here and go right across here behind the building. Gives me a chance to touch up any areas where it might have a little tiny bit of white showing too that I don't want. Soften up these edges with a little bit of water. Doesn't have to be a hard edge here. Now let's get in here. This is what I wanted to see, is get in here with this orange right in here. Boom, yeah. That really pushes the pump house forward towards us. Here if you want. And just come in with a damp brush. Make sure that this edge is soft, there isn't a hard edge to it. Okay, let's turn that over. Alright, yeah, see now we've got all that depth we want. We've got the sky is behind the pump house. There. Got a touch of orange into here. Good. Okay. I keep saying okay and then I keep adding more, but that's all right. Adding a little bit of depth on top of those layers that we already put in there. Okay, I think the sky is fine. Now look what happened. The water is in front of the sky just the way I wanted it to be. The pump house and the hill are in front of the water. The jetty is now in front of the hill and the pump house. So all of that has worked. Now what I'm going to do is come in here and I'm going to take a pencil real quick and just reestablish. I see a pencil line that I must have already been thinking about for this. Okay, so where I've drawn in pencil, so in here, here, and here, here is I'm gonna go wet in here first and then drop that blue or gray color in that's a little bit darker, leaving this and this light. And the last thing we'll do is we'll dry that and we'll put the waves in on top. And we won't have to get very finicky and put a lot of waves in. A few is probably plenty. It just needs to be darker than that middle layer. So the first thing I'm going to do is come in and wet the water area, the whole water area, because I want a soft edge on what I'm doing right now. Okay. Nothing too crazy, just getting it wet. Now we're mixing up a color that is darker than the first layer of water that we put down, and we can come right up to the jetty. You don't want to have any white spots underneath that shadow. There really aren't any there. Let this run in. I'm gonna actually beef up that color a little bit stronger. Run this into the wet paper. Even darker with it. More on the blue side than on the gray side right now. And even stronger. Has to be lighter than the jetty by a little bit. Certainly lighter than the shadow on the jetty. But I want to get that shadow in of the pump house and actually just, while it's wet, drop a little bit of orange in there because that's the light coming through. And we can even add a little bit more water here. We really want this to have a soft edge at this point. We don't want it to be too defined. There. All right, I'm going to dry this. We're going to come in and put the waves in on top of what we have here. I'm going to just grab my kitchen towel and do a little wipe there. Okay. I'm going to dry this. We're going to put the waves on top of that and put the railings in and we'll be all done. Okay. We are back. I'm going to use the number 4 round, as well as that rigger and that pointy little one. I'm going to try and make some little wave shapes. We don't have to do a lot of them, but we do have to do some of them. The color is the combination of the 2 paint colors, like everything else in this painting, I guess. And it's a little bit strong. It's got more blue in it than orange, but the orange is stronger as far as toning, so it about balances out. And the move for this is the waves are a little bit fatter in the middle and skinnier on the end, so you just touch with the point, you push in, you pull up, and they're horizontal. And you push down, something like that. And you don't have to do them everywhere, and you shouldn't make them in straight lines, so make sure that they are a little bit jagged, or irregular. There's some that come straight out from the jetty wall. And also break some of it up with a soft edge. Connect some of them. Go from one to the other. I think connecting them is a good idea. We want to leave some of that light shining through those, so don't do too much. Definitely darker back here. I want to make sure I get that. I'm working again pretty far back on the brush. I don't like holding it like a pencil. You can do more of that here, but not too much. And I'm going to warm up the color a little bit. Even within these shapes, you can change the color a little bit. Vary the length of them, vary the depth of the how far you push down on the brush. I'm doing this all with the number 4 right now. I'm remembering to connect some of these together, not to leave them all completely separate. They look better when there's a little bit of connection to them. So it's a process. You go back and forth. I started from the bottom left and I'm working across. And sometimes I just fill in the space between them. And that gives you a nice pattern. And it continues right out. You do some longer ones the further you get away, and connect them. As you get closer into the jetty, you can even come in with towards the middle. There's a section here where you don't even have any waves. You just got a little bit darker. Maybe in all the way in here. Punch in some of that color into it. And down here underneath this little ledge, there's definitely a barrier. This area back behind those edges is much lighter, and we're going to leave that alone with almost no waves in it at all. When you make the edges underneath the dark bit of the jetty, just connect them, and you can do them as like dots and dashes, and the waves go right through the shadow of the pump house. Don't stop and start them on either side. Remember to step back when you're doing this and make sure you're happy with the way your shapes are forming up. Don't forget to connect some of them together, but leave plenty of little sparkly bits of white as well, or not white, but the light color that's underneath. When you get out from behind the pump house, I'm warming up the shadow just a little bit. This area has more shadow in it. There's a shape here that's kind of open. There's a shape here that's kind of open, so I'm kind of trying to obey that. Put a little tiny bit of tone under here, maybe a couple of waves, something like that. This area over here really needs to get a wash into it and then start to bring out your shapes again. Yeah. I'm going to call that crude but effective. I think it works pretty well. Maybe break this up a little bit. Maybe come in here with a brush and soften that up a little bit. You can always come back in with the small brush again, with a little bit more paint on it this time, and just do a couple of more. As long as we're here, let's finish this bad boy up, all right? I'm ready to be done. You're ready to be done. Let's get this bad boy done. So with, I don't even know what number this is. I like this brush because it's got these indented, it's a bulb and then they're flattened. It's nice to hold. This is the one I like holding like a pencil. It's got a really nice small point on it. So you come in with thick paint, you take most of it off on your brush, and you can make a pretty fine line with it. Right in front of the pump house. It changes angles there just a little bit as it follows what's happening here. Make these even darker in front of the pump house. Done like that. And then we still do dark all the way to about there. And then it changes. I'm looking for the right color to use. Looking for a really kind of light bluish color or a gray. So I'm using colored pencil at this point. Now I'm going to use this light gray, I think. Yeah. So where it's darker behind, you move to a lighter color for those railings. Here where it peeps through and here where it peeps through it, it continues the illusion. There. I think I'm going to go even darker here where it's where the water is behind it and it help push it forward a little bit. So I'm going to get some pigment on my brush. Take the top rail, darken it up a little bit. Helps make it a little bit irregular too. And if you want to, you can make a corresponding bar underneath. Not everywhere. Maybe something like that. I think that's it. I think this is our painting. I hope you followed along and I hope you enjoyed it. I'm really pleased that we're able to knock this bad boy out in 2 colors. So it was a bit of an experiment, but I think it worked really well, and it all came down to value. Once we got the right value in for that water and we keyed everything around it, we kept asking the question, is this lighter or darker than the water? Is this sky lighter or darker than the water, or should I change it in order to make the illusion work? Is this darker than the water? Because this is darker than the water and it's darker than this, but this is darker than the sky. And it's just always looking at all those things and making, with watercolor and the transparent layers you can put on, you can, right up to the very end, you can make those decisions. So I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. I'm going to wet my brush and take most of the color out. There, now it's done. It's signed and everything. All right, for those of you that are in my live classes, I will see you on Tuesday. And for those that are YouTube followers, thanks for following along. And I'll see you next time. I'm going to try and be much more regular about doing these again, and eventually even moving on to a level with Patreon and having multiple paintings a month in a subscription basis, if that's something you're interested in. If it is something you're interested in and you want to be able to see fuller, more expanded paintings and maybe even critiques, shoot me a message and let me know. That would be really helpful. Other than that, have a great evening, and it was fun painting with you. Not quite a blooper reel, but I did forget to show you guys the reveal after the blue tape is off, because that's one of my favorite parts. So I just wanted to show you again after the tape came off. It did a pretty good job. I did have a little bleed here, but a little couple layers of white paint over and over will just take that out and it'll be ready to pop into a frame. So Hope to see you in class or see you on YouTube.